She thought she was gonna take my pension, that I'd work 35 years in the mill, hands cracked and back shot, just so she and some slimeball named Henry could sip margaritas on my dime. Yeah. No. My name's Mark Jensen. I'm 58 years old, and I've worked at Ashland Steel since I was 23. 35 years of hard labor, sun up to sundown, putting food on the table, and stuffing my pension account like a turkey every paycheck. Not flashy. Not a guy who needs much. A house I paid off early, a beat-up Ford F-150 I'm too stubborn to replace, and a wife, Cynthia, who I thought was in this with me. She wasn't. For most of those years, Cynthia played the part. Sweet, supportive. She worked part-time at a boutique downtown, kept the house running. We never had kids, not for lack of trying. Life just works that way sometimes. But we made it work, or so I thought. Nights on the porch, talking about where we'd travel when I retired. Ireland, maybe. Greece. Little places that felt like rewards for all the time we put in. But I guess Cynthia got tired of waiting. And she met Henry. I remember the first time she mentioned him. Some hotshot financial advisor. Helped one of her boutique friends maximize returns. Funny thing was, he never came up again after that. I figured he was just some guy at her work events. Until I started noticing the trips. Girls' weekends that turned into long weeks. Bank withdrawals that didn't line up with anything we talked about. And worst of all, the coldness. Like I was an obligation, not a partner. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. Marriage ain't a fairy tale. But my gut, the same gut that told me when a steel beam was gonna crack, started whispering, this ain't right. I should have confronted her, right? That's what you're thinking. But no, not yet. You see, my dad taught me that if you're gonna swing, you make sure you hit the mark. So instead, I watched. I collected. And I planned. So here's the thing about pension statements, they don't lie. They show the numbers, black and white, plain as day. And one rainy Tuesday in April, I sat down with a cup of bad diner coffee and opened the latest envelope from my pension fund. Except this one felt off. Like the kind of off where you know your gut's screaming, but your brain's too polite to interrupt. The numbers were lower than they should have been. Not a lot, but enough. At first, I chalked it up to the market. But I'm not an idiot. I know how my account grows, and this wasn't just some dip in the Dow. I went back through the last few statements, cross-referenced them like I was hunting down a union grievance. And then I saw it, withdrawals. Little ones at first, masked as investment reallocations, which is finance speak for, hey, we're moving your money but don't worry about it. Except I didn't authorize anything. That's when Henry's name popped back into my mind. The financial advisor Cynthia had mentioned, all casual-like. That slick grin, the kind of guy who wears loafers without socks. I swear I could smell his cologne through the paper. But even then, I didn't jump. You can't win a fight on suspicion. So I logged into our bank accounts, something I hadn't really done in a while. Cynthia handled the bills, the day-to-day stuff. She always said I was too busy to worry about it. Turns out I should have worried. There were transfers, steady ones, to an account I didn't recognize. Offshore. The kind of offshore that says I don't want Uncle Sam knowing about this. And the signature on the authorizations. Mine. Except it wasn't mine. It was close. Close enough to fool a bank that doesn't really care. But I know how I sign my J. It felt like someone reached inside my chest and twisted. 35 years. And she was skimming off the top, feeding Henry's pockets like it was just another bill to pay. I shut the laptop, sat there, let it settle. I could have gone home, kicked the door in, demanded answers. But no, that's not how you win. Not against people like Henry and Cynthia. You don't confront. You corner. And right then, I made up my mind. I wasn't just gonna get my money back. I was gonna make damn sure she understood exactly what she tried to steal. The next day, I drove out to see my brother, Ben. Now, if you knew the history between us, you'd understand that this wasn't some warm, fuzzy Hallmark moment. Ben and I hadn't spoken much in 5 years. Stupid family stuff, arguments about mom's will, old wounds that never quite scabbed over. But he was still my brother. And right then, I needed blood. Ben's got a little boy, Mikey. Kid's 10, has cerebral palsy. Bright as hell, sharp with the one-liners. But life dealt him a rough hand. Ben's wife left not long after Mikey's diagnosis. Couldn't handle it, I guess. Ben's been raising that boy on his own ever since, doing odd jobs, scraping by. When I showed up unannounced, Ben looked like he expected me to throw the first punch. Instead, I just said, "I need to talk." We sat out on his back porch. Mikey was inside watching cartoons, laughing that belly laugh that makes you forget the world's ugly. I laid it all out: Cynthia, Henry, the offshore account, the pension. Ben shook his head, whistled low. "Damn, Mark, that's cold." "Yeah," I said, "but I've got a plan." He raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, you're gonna flatten Henry with a tire iron?" I smiled. Tempting. But no. I want to hurt him where it counts. And then I told him what I had in mind. I was going to redirect my pension. Every last cent. But not to me. To Mikey. I wanted to set up a trust that would take care of that kid long after Ben and I were dust. At first, Ben refused. Said he couldn't take my money. Said it wasn't right. "You think I'm doing this for you?" I asked. "This is for Mikey. For peace of mind. For knowing that when I'm gone, that boy's got something solid under his feet." Ben got quiet. His eyes got glassy. And then he nodded. The next day, I called Elaine, my pension manager. She's been handling my retirement for years. Salt of the earth, tough as nails, the kind of woman who keeps a Louisville Slugger under her desk just in case. I told her everything except Cynthia's affair. Just the fraud. The forged signatures. The offshore account. Elaine didn't blink. "Mark, I'm gonna make this right. We'll lock it down." And we did. Changed beneficiaries, created the Jensen Family Trust, ironclad. Set it up so that no matter what Cynthia tried to pull, she'd never touch another dime. She wouldn't even smell it. But I wasn't done. Not even close. See, I still had the house to deal with. The house Cynthia planned to take half of in the divorce she was probably timing for my retirement day. So I made a few calls. Quiet ones. To a realtor I trusted. Put the house up for sale under the radar, no listing, no sign out front. The deal would close the day before my retirement hit. I played it calm at home. Cynthia didn't suspect a thing. She kept up the charade, asking what I wanted to do for my retirement party. Smiling. Planning. And I smiled back, knowing the ground was shifting right beneath her feet. If you've ever worked in a steel mill, you know what it feels like when something's about to break. There's this eerie quiet that settles over everything just before the machine gives out or the beam snaps. That's where I was, living in that quiet, knowing the storm was coming. Cynthia was in full loving wife mode, which honestly should have tipped her hand sooner. She hadn't made me coffee in 2 years, but suddenly she was brewing fresh pots every morning. Asking me about retirement plans, even suggesting we book a trip to Tuscany, right after my pension hit, of course. I played along. Smiled. "Tuscany sounds great, babe." Meanwhile, I was finalizing the paperwork on selling the house. Closing date, the Friday before my last shift. Money? Wired straight into the trust. She didn't have a clue. But here's the kicker, Henry. That slimy little eel was still working the angles. I knew Cynthia was still meeting with him because her yoga nights conveniently lined up with his so-called financial seminars at the Radisson downtown. Subtle as a freight train, those two. I hired a private investigator. Not because I needed proof of the affair, I already knew. But I wanted a timeline. Paper trails. Photos. Something concrete for when the cards hit the table. Turns out Henry wasn't just Cynthia's lover. He was also the puppet master behind the pension heist. The PI dug up emails, wire transfers, and even a drafted divorce settlement with Henry's greasy fingerprints all over it. They had it all planned. She'd file the papers right after my pension cleared, take half the house, half the pension, and ride off into the sunset with Henry and my hard-earned cash. Too bad I'd gutted the pension and sold the house from under them. But I wasn't ready to play my hand just yet. I wanted to see how far Cynthia would go. How bold she'd get. Because people like her? They always overreach. One night, about 2 weeks before my retirement, she poured me a glass of bourbon. Top shelf stuff. Sat down next to me on the couch, leaned in close, and said, "I've been thinking, maybe we should downsize after you retire. You know, simplify." I almost choked on my drink. "Downsize?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," she said, flashing the practiced smile. "Sell this place while the market's hot. Move somewhere cozier. Maybe closer to Henry's, the coast." There it was. She slipped. I let it go, nodding like she'd just suggested repainting the kitchen. "You know what? That's a great idea." She kissed my cheek, and I swear it took every ounce of self-control not to burst out laughing. Because the house wasn't hers to sell. It wasn't even mine anymore. It was gone, just waiting for the paperwork to finalize. I could almost hear the clock ticking down. 2 weeks left. And Cynthia had no idea the ground beneath her was about to fall away. Retirement day. The guys at the mill threw me a little shindig, coffee, donuts, a card everyone signed, even my foreman managed to say something nice. 35 years wrapped up in one speech and a handshake. Felt strange walking out of there knowing I wasn't coming back, but stranger still knowing that Cynthia thought today was the day she'd cash out on my life's work. I got home early, about 3 p.m. Cynthia was there, wearing that fake smile so wide I thought her face might crack. 2 wine glasses on the table. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong. "Happy retirement, honey. Sit down, let's toast." I played along, sat at the table, and raised my glass. She made a whole speech about new beginnings and exciting adventures ahead, and I just nodded, letting her think she was on the verge of winning the lottery. After the second glass, she stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, and slid an envelope across the table. My gut tightened. I knew what it was before I opened it, divorce papers. Just like clockwork. "I think this is the right time," she said softly, almost rehearsed. "We've grown apart, Mark. We both deserve to be happy." I stared at the papers. The gall. The timing. Like she couldn't even let me have one day. She sat down, folded her hands neatly. "Look, I don't want this to be ugly. We can split everything 50-50. The house, the pension, the accounts." I looked up slowly. Dead calm. 50-50, huh? She nodded, looking all sympathetic. Probably thought I was going to beg, plead, get angry. But I just smiled. "Sure," I said. "I think we can work something out." She looked relieved, like this was going to be easier than she thought. But then I stood up, walked over to the side table, and pulled out a folder of my own. "Just one thing," I said, placing it on the table in front of her. She frowned, flipping it open. Bank statements. Pension documents. The trust details. Sale of the house. The receipt showing that the house had closed yesterday. Her face went pale. This isn't right," she stammered. "What is this?" "It's the new reality," I said. "The house? Sold. Pension? Gone. Transferred into a trust for Mikey, you know, Ben's son? The kid you never asked about." Her hands started to shake. "You can't do that." "Oh, I can," I said, sitting back down. "And I did. You thought I'd just hand over half my life's work? To you and Henry." Her jaw dropped. She knew the game was up. But I wasn't done. I leaned forward, tapping the last document. "And here's the best part, you forged my signature. That little offshore account Henry set up? Yeah, I've got copies. Photos. Emails. Proof of fraud." She tried to regain her footing. "You can't prove Cynthia," I cut her off. "Don't. I've got enough to bury you in court. But I'm not here to ruin your life. I just want you out of mine." She sat there frozen. Pale. Silent. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. "Henry still waiting on that Tuscany trip?" I asked, holding back a grin. "You might want to tell him it's going to be a staycation instead." I left her sitting there, staring at the wreckage of everything she thought she was going to take from me. The next morning, my phone lit up like the 4th of July. 6 missed calls from Cynthia, 3 voicemails, and 1 particularly frantic text. We need to talk. You can't just do this. Oh, but I could. And I had. I didn't respond. Let her stew. I knew exactly what she was doing, scrambling, trying to figure out how her neat little plan unraveled overnight. Probably pacing that empty house, realizing the walls were closing in. I pictured Henry, too, sweating in some cheap suit, wondering why the big payout wasn't coming. Midday, she showed up at my temporary apartment. I was staying at an old buddy's place, one of those extended stay spots where no one asks questions. She knocked once, then again, louder. Mark, open the door. We need to discuss this. Discuss. Like she'd tried to discuss my pension out of existence. I didn't answer. I just sat there, sipping coffee, watching the seconds tick by on the microwave clock. After a while, the knocking stopped, replaced by a voicemail. You're being unreasonable. I'm willing to work this out, but you're going to ruin both of us if you don't come to the table. That one made me chuckle. Ruin both of us as if we were in this together. Like I hadn't spent the last year unknowingly underwriting her and Henry's fantasy life. The thing is, I knew Cynthia wasn't just worried about the money. She was worried about the fraud. The forgery. She'd crossed lines that went way beyond marital betrayal. Lines that could land her in a courtroom or worse. And here's where it got real interesting. The private investigator texted me later that afternoon. He'd been tailing Henry since the fallout began. Seems Henry had moved out of his fancy downtown condo and into a cheaper, cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. Money troubles? Probably. No more skimming off my pension to fund his silk shirts and overpriced espresso. But the cherry on top? The PI had managed to snag a few conversations Henry had with his clients. Turns out I wasn't the first guy Henry had helped relocate funds behind someone's back. But I might just be the last. Because I passed everything to Elaine and my lawyer. Quietly, we prepared the fraud case. Not to press charges immediately, but as leverage. Cynthia and Henry could hang themselves trying to fight it, or they could take the out I was about to offer. That night, Cynthia texted again. I don't know what you think you have, but you're making a huge mistake. Let's sit down like adults. Oh, now she wanted to be adults. I typed back one sentence. Check your email. And in her inbox? A neat little packet, copies of the forged documents, photos of her and Henry from the PI, bank records showing the money trail. Attached was my settlement offer. No alimony. No claim to the pension. No claim to the house proceeds. Walk away with what you stole and disappear, or I press charges. Simple. Clean. She could keep whatever crumbs Henry hadn't already spent. I never got a text back. But the next day, her lawyer called mine, voice low, like he was embarrassed to even be involved. We're prepared to accept the terms. The settlement was signed in less than a week. Cynthia walked away with nothing but what she'd skimmed off before I caught her, money I knew wouldn't last long once Henry got his hands on it. I didn't care. That wasn't the point anymore. I had what mattered, my pension locked away, the house sold, and the trust set up for Mikey. I never saw Cynthia in person again after that day. I dropped the hammer. I half expected her to try one last face-to-face, maybe shed some crocodile tears, make some grand apology, but nothing. Just silence. Maybe she was too ashamed, or maybe she was too busy trying to patch things up with Henry, though I doubted that lasted. You know the funny thing about people like her? They never think about the long game. They're all about the quick score, the fast escape. They never consider what happens when the person they're playing knows how to play back. Smarter. Quieter. About 2 months later, I heard through a friend of a friend that Henry had skipped town. Word was he'd gotten into trouble with another client, same scam, different name. Cynthia? She was still in town, working part-time at that same boutique, wearing a smile as thin as cheap veneer. Did I feel bad for her? No. I felt nothing. That's the truth. There's only so much energy you can spend on someone who tried to gut you like that. Around the same time, I invited Ben and Mikey over for dinner. First time we'd all sat down together in years. Ben looked around my new place, nothing fancy, just a small apartment while I figured out the next chapter, and he nodded like he could finally breathe easy. Mikey, though, he was the star. Kid spent the whole evening telling me about some model rocket project he was working on, asking if I knew anything about aerodynamics. I didn't, but I promised him we'd learn together. After dinner, I pulled Ben aside and told him the trust was finalized. "Mikey's set," I said. "No matter what happens to me." Ben's eyes got misty, but he didn't say much, just clapped me on the shoulder the way brothers do when words don't quite cut it. And me? I started figuring out what life looked like when you don't have to punch a clock. Woke up when I wanted. Took long drives. Started building little wooden projects, birdhouses at first, then a bookshelf I'm still kinda proud of. I'd always planned to retire with Cynthia, but looking back, I think I would have been miserable. She never cared about the life we built, just the money it could give her. I'm not saying I wanted things to turn out like this, but some endings are necessary. And if I learned anything from this whole mess, it's that you don't just let people steal from you, especially not the life you work to build. You fight back. You hit where it counts. And when you win, you walk away knowing you held onto the one thing they couldn't touch, your dignity. A few months later, just when I thought it was all behind me, I got a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A real, honest-to-God handwritten letter. Who even does that anymore? The return address caught my eye right away, some law firm in Miami. I almost tossed it, figuring it was junk. But curiosity's a funny thing. Inside? A brief note from an attorney handling an investigation into Henry Lawson. Turns out good ol' Henry had been running offshore schemes for years, laundering money through shady accounts, hiding assets for other clients. When the IRS caught wind, they tore through his records like wolves. And my case? The paper trail I left behind? That was part of what helped them crack it open. My PI's photos, the bank statements, the forged documents. I'd handed them a small but crucial piece of a much bigger puzzle. The letter ended with this: "If you're willing, your testimony could help recover additional funds for other victims. Please contact us at your convenience." I sat there for a minute, staring at the letter, feeling the weight of it. Other victims. Other people like me who got played, whose lives were turned upside down. At first, I didn't want to get involved. Felt like digging up bones I'd already buried. But then I thought about Mikey, about Ben, about how easily Cynthia and Henry had tried to wipe me out. And I realized I wasn't done yet. So I called the attorney, gave them everything I had. We spent weeks on the phone, piecing together timelines, tracing accounts, connecting dots. Apparently, Henry's operation spanned multiple states, a dozen victims. Some of them military vets like me, working men, small business owners. Folks who trusted the wrong people. When the dust settled, Henry was indicted on a slew of charges. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Facing serious time. Cynthia? She wasn't directly tied to the larger scheme. She got lucky. Again. But Henry? He wasn't walking away from this one. One morning, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun crawl over the hills, and got a call from the prosecutor's office. Henry Lawson accepted a plea deal, they said. 15 years. No parole. I let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Thanks," I said. "Glad to hear it." They paused. "And thanks for what you did. Without your cooperation, we wouldn't have had enough." Funny thing, those were the same words I told Ben months before. Mikey's set. No matter what happens to me. Full circle. After the call about Henry's sentencing, something shifted in me. Not a big, dramatic moment, no fireworks or ticker tape parades. Just a slow easing of the tension that had wrapped itself around my chest for nearly 2 years. I didn't tell Ben right away. I let that news settle, let myself process it first. But a week later, I invited him and Mikey out for another dinner, just like before. This time, I grilled steaks out back, the sun dipping low while Mikey gave me an enthusiastic rundown of his latest science project. Something about building a wind turbine out of scrap metal. Kid's a genius. When the plates were cleared and Mikey had gone inside to watch cartoons, I poured Ben and me each a beer. Henry took a deal, I said. 15 years. No parole. Ben froze mid-sip, eyebrows lifting. 15? Damn. I nodded. They got him good. Ran that con too many times. We weren't the only ones. Ben leaned back, exhaled slow. Feels final, doesn't it? Yeah, I said. It does. There wasn't much more to say after that. Just two brothers sitting in the quiet, the weight of the past finally lightening. Later that night, I stood in my garage, my little sanctuary. I started tinkering again. Built Mikey a proper workbench for his projects, and for myself, a couple of birdhouses, a half-finished rocking chair. My hands still knew the rhythm of work, even if the mill was behind me. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, felt the grain. Simple, honest, no schemes, no surprises. And I thought about Cynthia for the first time in a while. Wondered what she was doing, if she ever regretted it. Not just the scam, but all of it. The life we built, the trust she burned. But the truth? I didn't really care. That part of my life was closed. Packed away like an old toolbox that didn't fit anymore. About a month later, I got another letter. Handwritten again. This time from one of the other victims. You don't know me, but I heard you were the one who came forward first. My wife and I almost lost everything to Henry Lawson. Because of you, we're getting some of it back. Just wanted to say thank you. I pinned that letter on the wall above my workbench. A quiet reminder that even when life tries to grind you down, you stand up. You push back. I never planned on being the guy who brought down a con artist. Honestly, I just wanted my peace. My pension, my house, my quiet life. The rest found me. And maybe that's the thing about life, it doesn't always let you ride out easy. Sometimes it asks you to stand up. Sometimes it asks for more. A year after the whole mess wrapped up, I finally bought a place of my own. Nothing fancy. Small ranch house on the edge of town, with a patch of land big enough to breathe, but not so big I couldn't mow it myself. No ties, no strings, no shared accounts. Just mine. Ben and Mikey helped me move in. Well, Mikey mostly supervised, cracking jokes the whole time about my ancient furniture. Ben rolled his eyes and told him to respect his elders. I laughed harder than I had in a while. Later, when the boxes were unpacked and the sun was setting, we sat out back again. Mikey was messing with the wind turbine he'd built, trying to get it to light up a string of old Christmas bulbs. And sure enough, when the wind picked up just right, those little bulbs flickered to life. Ben leaned back in his chair, watching the lights. You ever think about what you'd be doing if all this hadn't happened? I thought about it. About the steel mill. The grind. The quiet assumption that Cynthia and I would grow old together. Yeah, I said. I'd probably be sitting in that old house, pretending not to notice how empty it felt. Ben nodded, not pushing for more. He didn't have to. And that's the thing, I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Cynthia, not at Henry. The anger had burned off like fog under the morning sun, leaving something sharper underneath. Clarity. I realized I didn't need Tuscany. Didn't need the pension trips or the big plans. What I needed was space to rebuild on my terms. With people who gave a damn. So I kept building. Birdhouses turned into furniture. Furniture turned into repairs around town. Folks started dropping by, asking if I could fix this, mend that. I didn't charge much, didn't need to. The pension took care of me. Mikey's trust was locked down tight. The rest? It was just about staying busy, keeping my hands moving. One morning, I opened my mailbox to find another letter. No return address. Inside was a card. Simple, plain. I'm sorry. For everything. I stared at it for a long while, knowing exactly who it was from. No signature, but it didn't need one. Cynthia's handwriting, flawless cursive that never quite matched the woman behind it. I folded the card, put it back in the envelope, and tossed it in the fire pit out back. Watched it curl and burn to ash. Some things don't deserve to be kept. Now, when I sit on my porch at night, I watch Mikey's wind turbine spin under the moonlight. Those little bulbs still flicker, casting just enough glow to remind me that life keeps turning, even after the worst storms. I'm not rich. I'm not famous. But I've got peace. And I earned it. Let Cynthia chase whatever comes next. Let Henry rot in a cell, counting the years. Me? I've got a good chair, a steady breeze, and a view that's mine. That's enough. Because when you've been through hell and come out standing, sometimes the quiet is the sweetest revenge of all.